So getting started with data visualization, I'm going to go through the what, the why, the who and the how, and then hopefully be signposting some tools and resources at the end. And I will make the slides available. There are lots of links, lots of things for you to go and take a look at. So don't feel like you have to, madly write them all down. I can send them to you, or Tech Trust will send them along to you. So yeah, there will be time for that. So just a little bit of background. My name's Katy. I work at MPC in the comms team. So we basically help the charity sector have the maximum impact possible. And we do that at various levels. So by supporting individuals and organisations directly, by kind of creating thought leadership and research, and then coming up with kind of ideas and solutions at more of a kind of infrastructural level. And really a lot of my job as part of the comms team there is doing a lot of sort of translation work, translating a lot of academic rigour and evidence to try and make that more accessible to people. So it's quite a small comms team, and a lot of what I'm here today to kind of talk to you through, I've learned on the job, and I'm still learning, definitely still learning. I don't know it all, but hopefully I can save you all a bit of time with some stuff that I've learned through going to other people's training, from doing my own reading, and generally just being a bit curious about the area as well. So, very academic way to start is to define our terms. So what are we talking about? What is data visualization? So surely the clue is in the name, just presenting your data in a visual way, right? It doesn't always kind of cover it though, when you look at, some examples that's data presented in a visual way, but that doesn't really seem kind of capture what we're talking about and what we want from data visualization, does it? So a better question maybe is, why visualize your data? And so I thought, to kind of kick us off, maybe you guys could just turn to the person next to you, 30 seconds, don't worry about small talk, don't worry about talking about how you got here today, just jump straight in with, why would anyone visualize data, and particularly why would your organisation want to visualise its data? Maybe just have a 30-second chat with someone next to you. Yeah, so this is a definition I really like. Is any effort to help people understand the significance of data by placing it in a visual context. Patterns, trends and correlations that might go undetected in a text-based data can be exposed and recognised easier with data visualisation software. So say I am a charity and my beneficiary is the number 4. I want to find the number 4 in this load of data. Put your hand up when you can see all the 4s, if you think you know how many 4s are in there. Quick, speedy? What do you think?
10.
That was very quick. How about now for everyone else that's struggling? Yeah, a little bit easier. So just a small kind of visual element that we've introduced there, a bit of size and a bit of colour maybe, just makes all the difference there. So that has helped you to engage with the numbers much quicker, much easier, and find what you're looking for. I think another point is, like you were sort of saying, is to encourage people to engage. So even if what's happened here, this is kind of gender pay gap data, and what's going on here is they actually have used colour to make it easier, but this might just be me, but I still kind of slightly lose the will to live looking at that, maybe because I am more comms and kind of creativity focused. So looking at the data, you would be able to engage with that because it's laid out very clearly and it does have some visual cues. But what information is beautiful, this is the data that from them have done, is then visualized it, because that's what they do brilliantly. And use the same data, and actually, because it's a gender pay gap, they've actually physically shown the gap with these points here, so you can see female pay and male pay, and then the distance between those two things. So as well as making it easier to see, you kind of want to engage with that more. I'm more interested in looking at that than as a table of data, and I'll probably get to it quicker, and I'll see the trends, and I'll see, wow, what's that huge gap there? Who's that? Is that, I think it's medical professionals in the US. So helping people to engage and also encouraging them to engage, which is really important for charities, I think. So this is another definition that I came across that was more talking specifically about infographics, which is that infographics have a distinct story or editorialized narrative. But I do think that's useful to apply more broadly to data visualization. It's why I like to think more of kind of data visualization as visual storytelling, because I think that does bring in that why and that significance. So if you think about what a story is plot, which is what is happening and it's pure information, but it's also narrative, so it's why what's happening matters. It's the significance of it. And that's really, really relevant for charities, is to get that importance across to people and not just show them loads of numbers and hope they figure it out. It's finding that story within it. So we'll come on a bit to this, but whatever we're calling it, there's a tendency to aim for, oh, it just looks really nice, and to kind of strip away and go for the jazzy stuff. And so we need to be careful about that, and we also need to be careful, but we still kind of need clarity, and we need an intention in what we're saying. So kind of getting that balance between trying to keep it quite simple, and strip away some of the excess, but also not be so simplifying that we're misleading people. But why are we doing this, which is what we were kind of discussing, is a really useful question. It's a really useful question for you to ask yourselves in your organisation to help you keep focus. I definitely know that sometimes I just think, oh, I just want to put in something fun here, and I don't quite know why. I just think there needs to be something nice. But keeping that focus of what is the goal, why do we want to visualise this data, and voicing that not just to yourself, but also with your team members, can really help you keep focus, because it can take time and it can take effort and iteration. So making sure that you have kind of a goal and a focus will really help. So I think there are sort of roughly two broad reasons why, and again, this is why I was saying you guys are sort of doing my work for me. I've kind of, again, coming from a comms angle, often thinking about it as telling the story, but like you said, revealing patterns and trends in the data can help you see the story there yourself. So remembering that data visualization doesn't just come in when you're wanting to show that information to someone, but when you're trying to find it yourself, first of all, not just looking at a spreadsheet of data, but trying to kind of move through put things into different charts and different graphs and seeing what patterns emerge when you manipulate the data in that way. So this is a screenshot of a tool that the Trussell Trust have developed internally, and they gave us permission to share this in a report that we did at MPC about innovations in measurement and evaluation. And so this is an internal tool that they've used to map basically lots and lots of data that comes in through their food bank. So Trussell Trust is a food bank charity. And it's quite complicated, as you can see. But lots of information they feed in there are things like where people are accessing their services, where there's the highest number of need. I think they also have information in there as to why people have been referred to the service, so what's causing them to need to rely on food banks. Distance travelled as well, which I think can help them plan where they might have gaps in their services and think ahead. And yeah, so I guess the colours there, that's a particular region, and the colours are sort of showing the intensity of usage of, I think, per population. But the data that they have got, as I've said, it can be used internally to help them plan their services, but they've also brought a lot of the data out to be used in different ways to tell different stories that was within that data. So on the far side, the primary reasons for referral to Trussell Trust food banks, the highest red bar in the far side there is benefit delays. So sharing that in quite a accessible format does allow people to see what other issues are at play there, but there is something that's being an issue that's being raised there in that format there. And then, for example, on this side, there is a much simpler, this almost decorated numbers, you would want to call this. Maybe an infographic, but I sort of think decorated numbers. That does seem to have more of a kind of positive message, some smiling faces that highlights how they're meeting that need. So the number of 3-day emergency food supplies given to people in crisis. So this kind of leads me on to the who, which is your audience. So thinking of the who as your best friend of your why. It's the Joe Biden and Obama of why they kind of, you can't imagine them apart. Why are we doing this? But also who's our audience? So asking yourself as well, who are we trying to reach with our visualizations, with our visual storytelling? So again, keeping your audience front and center. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel even? And what do you want them to do with that information? Classic comms principles. And how will they be consuming the information or interacting with it? Social media? Is it more within a report format? So again, using these Trussell Trust examples, the first one we were saying is much better for an internal use, internal audiences, and maybe sharing some of that information with the board, and possibly taking some of the information out in fairly complex form to researchers, policymakers. They might want to access that data. Again, this graph, it kind of looks a little bit more like, might appeal to journalists, but campaigning bodies as well. So campaigning body who's interested in the impact of benefit delays on people, and policy change groups and so on. And also general public as well. You can imagine that being shared on Twitter by people who are kind of, outraged by some of the numbers there. And this is, I think, has more of a fundraising message targeting the general public, that, the Trussell Trust is, providing this service. This is how many people they've reached, and there's a positive spin there. So this is something I'll touch on again at the end, but it's always worth keeping in mind with visualization who you might be excluding as well. So by visualizing something, you're making it accessible to a lot of people, more accessible to a lot of people, but it can also make it less accessible for other people. So considering sort of visual impairment and sight loss, cognitive impairment as well, and things like colourblindness, thinking about how to supplement your visualizations as well is really important. And that is definitely a whole really long lecture in itself, but I'll hopefully be able to signpost some stuff to learn more a little bit about that. So the million-dollar question of how are we going to do this? So we kind of like at MPC to talk about plan, do, assess and review. It's quite a good little cycle for you to run to make sure you're always improving your services and making sure what you're doing makes sense. So in terms of making a plan, thinking visually from the very start, including when you're collecting data and looking for a story. So again, as I said, thinking visually is a really good way to start trawling through your data and trying to understand what's being shown there. But I also think that as being in the comms team, I quite often get someone come to me and say, can you just visualize this? And it's not always that easy, because what they've given you doesn't quite have the angle that you want, or quite have an interesting kind of slant, and maybe you need more elements to it, or you have questions, or you need there's too much information in there and you kind of want to strip that back. So it should be part of the process from the beginning if you're thinking that you might want to visualize some of the data. So again, this kind of visual storytelling is not just the comms team's job necessarily. It's not one person's job, and it can be really good if you're collaborating. So some of what I do is internally at MPC is helping our researchers and consultants do more of that visual and creative thinking themselves, so that it doesn't just get to put on my desk and said, make this look visual. Because it can really help finding the stories. Do some research, including bad examples. So this is a real teacher. If you just Google bad data visualization, there are whole blogs and reams of websites about it, including people who have created those visualizations themselves and come back to them and been like, oh, why did I do that? Or, and that is a real tip as well for yourself, is to go back over stuff that you've done before and as a kind of critical friend, think about how you might do something differently. I was actually going to show you some of mine, but there isn't time. Oh, what a shame. So working with a framework, again, we love frameworks at MPC, and here's a really, really great one by people who know much better than I do. So this again is from Information is Beautiful, which is just such a resource. I recommend checking it out just because it's really good fun. And this goes through what makes a successful visualization. So it's quite a complicated Venn diagram, but right at the heart of it is a successful visualization, and goes through what are the kind of key overlapping elements that can align together into this perfect storm. And so we have information, which is kind of your data. We have the story, which is what I've been banging on about. The goal, so again, your why. What do you want people to do with this information, or what's it being used for? Who's it getting to? And the visual form as well, so how you're using the visual elements to bring that story to life. So again, that's the kind of what do you want people to know, what do you want them to feel, kind of. The story can be about feeling as well, and making people feel outraged or delighted or even curious to find out more. And seeing is a really big part of that, so just putting it right in people's face. Often as charities, we are trying to just get people to see something. So I think this is a really useful thing, and it can also be a useful tool for reviewing, again, your own work and thinking, okay, maybe actually it was missing a story. So what I've done is kind of created a plot of something, so it's information with a bit of a goal, but it's missing the visual form and it's missing the story, and building on those elements as you go. So definitely recommend taking a look at this and having a think about maybe visualizations that you see and think, what's missing here? Is there a story here? Is there a goal? So prioritizing your message when you get to the doing is a really key part. So I think, again, often we can be trying to say too much or show too much, and that can detract from the main story or the main point. And again, that depends on the goal of the visualization and who you're trying to reach. But if you are really trying to kind of get that clear story across, starting really simple, and then you can always build in. And then thinking about how text and image work together. So this was something that I came across at some really great training by Delayed Gratification, who are a slow journalist kind of publication, and they do some really great, really short sessions on how to do infographics, which I recommend. And they pulled together this, they brought this up for us, which was their attempt at a no text, visual only infographic. So does anyone think they know what this is showing? So we've got kind of a spiky, sparky shape here, and then a person who's all colourful. Can anyone kind of hazard a guess?
To do with expressive language? Like what part of the body people...
That's really interesting. I like that. That's not it, but it definitely could be. That's really interesting. It's interesting.
Something to do with the hands, whatever.
With the hands. Okay, so you think the hands is the problem? Yeah, because it's the main section. So this is functioning as a pie chart. Like that, the parts of the body through which they get the most gratification. Interesting. Eyes. Yeah, I see that. Okay, so the shape is actually...
I was going to say you need a sound effect.
A sound effect. Yeah. You know the answer. So the shape is actually a firework. Does that help?
All right.
Injuries, yeah. So it's a bit grisly, actually. It looks really fun, but it's actually a bit dark. Yeah, so hands, the main ones, and then you get to kind of eyes and head, and then kind of legs and so on. So this was kind of an exercise for them to sort of say, could you communicate visually only, without any words, without any numbers? And this does have a message, and really all this would take is to have a heading is injuries from fireworks, proportion of injuries from fireworks, and that would work really well. And there are no numbers, and you could add the numbers in. You could maybe do a scroll across to reveal the numbers and so on. But a really fun, I think, exercise for experimenting with this, which I was going to get you guys to do, but again, I don't think there's time, and there's quite a lot of you, is something that I've done at MPC as well, which is to kind of play a bit of data Pictionary. So taking maybe a stat that you're trying to work with, and doing this exact exercise, trying to communicate it visually only, trying to avoid writing numbers, so experimenting with how you might use, for example, if you're talking about a percentage of people, drawing 10 stick men and blurring out 2 or so on. And then kind of getting the people next to you to work out, do you know what I'm trying to communicate? And then I think, what I think that does is to kind of force you to think visually only, because I think when you know you have the text and you know you could just write out the stat in a sentence, you don't necessarily get as creative as you could do. And it helps you to refine your story down into that sentence, because the sentence of the statistics say sort of, 3 in 10 people phone our hotline for advice about money. would need to be quite simple to begin with if you were going to even attempt to do this exercise. So that exercise in itself, to kind of refine that down to a really simple story, can be really helpful. But it does also highlight the need for a balance between the excess of not having any text and overdoing it with the visuals and trying to cram too many visual elements in it at once, and where a simple word or a simple title can really help people get to the heart of what your story is. So it's a shame we couldn't do it today, but I really recommend it. It's just really good fun. So prioritizing what your message is and thinking about how text and kind of image and visuals work together is really, really key. And choosing the right form for this message. And actually what I will say about the Pictionary and drawing exercise is to remember that although this is a digital conference, data visualization predates kind of the digital stuff that we're using at the moment. So these are really lovely sort of hand-drawn visualizations by W.E. Du Bois at the World's Fair, in which he presents statistics about the African-American population at the time. And that I've included the link next. They're just really lovely and it's really interesting to look at. And this is a way more recent one. So this is a graph comparing the attendance at Trump's inauguration with the attendance at the Women's March protest. And they're using hands as a little dig at Donald Trump's hands, very childish, but quite fun. And it's quite nice. It looks quite nice. So again, we are thinking about digital programs that we can use, but sometimes it can really help you to just get down to pen and paper and sketch out your ideas and play around with them as a kind of complement to the digital stuff you might be using as well. So yes, as I said, so playing around with the right form for your message. So different charts for different stories, whether you're trying to show a kind of comparison, a hierarchy, a concept, time, scale, proportion, space, proximity. There's loads of stuff out there. And I'm not a data scientist and this stuff does baffle me. So there's a lot. So again, I would work a lot with colleagues who have that information, but there is loads of stuff online as well. To help you, including this website, datavizproject.com. As I said, this will be available to you afterwards, so don't feel you have to quickly scurry. But this has sort of every chart pretty much imaginable. So a really fun way to explore what's possible, even if it's really ambitious. It's a really good place for inspiration, same as the information is beautiful page. And what it does is it goes through the kind of function, so what you might want to use it for. So this Sunburst diagram, which it looks very complicated, and I've never used one before, but its function is apparently comparison. So I think it's, again, a little bit like a pie chart, but more complicated. And then it also gives you the kind of the form of the data that you would put in to kind of create this, and it talks you through it. And it's just a really great kind of one-stop shop. This I also really love, has a similar function, which is to help you think, what is your story, what's it showing, and then what graphs and charts are available for you. So I've actually got one I made earlier. It's basically it's a wheel, so it has, maybe I can say here, so it says what will your story focus on, and so therefore what infographic will you make, and then it has like loads of charts as well. And you kind of it gives you the information. It's got like a key, and then it shows you the type of chart you'll need. It's just really good fun. So this is by Jessica Bellamy Design, and she's great. She's all about inclusive design. She works in the States, but she shared this online for free, so you can just print it off and put a little split pin in it like I did and make it. So that's a really useful tool to just have on your desk if you are, again, still learning and trying to work out what is available to you. So with your doing, iterating and building is really, really key as well. So you won't get it right first time, and really so that's why that framework from information is beautiful is really useful to kind of go back to and say what's missing from this, and just showing it to other people as well. There's definitely stuff that they will see because they haven't made it, that they're just saying, oh, well, that actually, I totally interpreted that like this, rather than the way that you intended it. So yeah, definitely work with teammates to iterate what you come up with and test it out. And then assessing and reviewing, so seeing kind of the response that you get to your visualizations feedback, shares, engagement, and so on. And then again, as I said, returning to them after a while to sort of tear them apart really, and figure out how you might do it differently next time, and what you could have done better, because that will definitely help you to learn. So on to accessibility and inclusion. Again, as I said, there's so much to cover on this, and I won't be able to go into too much detail, and it's something I'm definitely learning myself, and we're doing lots of reviews of our own sort of digital accessibility at MPC. But this is just something really simple for not using colour as your only means of information where possible. So where, even if you print something out in black and white, using colour only causes problems, but can also cause problems for sort of things like colour blindness. So this is an example of possible solutions as well. So either sort of labelling your lines as well, or thinking about pattern as well. So again, always keeping your user in mind. And there's also some guidance here about creating alt text, so where there's a visual element to the work that you're sharing, how you can provide useful descriptions of what that image is for people who aren't able to see it visually. So getting on to tools and resources now. So I've put in a few that I know of and find useful, but there's so much out there. So again, just stay curious and Google and share around when you find something that's useful. So starting with actually kind of having the data and getting the data, we've got some guides at MPC that help charities kind of get to grips with the data that they're collecting possibly on their services, so kind of impact data, and how to kind of balance that quantitative and qualitative, impact reporting and so on, and different types of data for different purposes for assessing your work as well. So those can be quite helpful. It's more about, because we are focused more about impact data, but I had to give us a little plug. Impactsupport.org is something that we've been partnershiped on as well, which is about to merge with Inspiring Impact. But again, that has some good kind of demystifiers on your organisation's data and how to kind of get to grips with that. But also remembering that you don't have to necessarily be using your own data as a source of sharing things. There's so much open data sources at the moment. Some of them are a little bit more advanced and difficult than others, but as you saw from the gender pay gap stuff that I showed from Information is Beautiful, they've started to share their data sources in a more open source and accessible way for the data that they've used to create their lovely infographics. So there are plenty of sources out there. One that I discovered recently was this Google Trends. So I think it's you can search a word and to understand its usage. So kind of the uptake of terminology. So the way I discovered this was an article that was talking about the Latinx, the kind of gender-neutral Latino-Latina term, and the search for that was just showing the kind of uptake of usage of that word in this chart here. So there are these little kind of things around that could be useful for your purposes, depending on again, the story and the message that you're trying to get across. Data visualization tools, Tableau is I think probably one of the most well-known ones. I believe there's a free version, but it's kind of open source, so it's all part of their community. So Tableau is just such a leader in terms of the community around it and helping you to get better. So they've done some free online webinars that I've kind of saw some of my insights from, and yeah, there's the whole community around it. I think they do these sort of data challenges where they release some data and then let people kind of go wild with it and have a go. And it's a really good way to kind of learn and teach yourself. But so that's the public element is probably an issue for a lot of charities who might be using sort of data that is private or anonymized. So you can pay for private versions, and there are discounts for charities, I believe, as well. So yeah, and some courses online as well. Pictochart is just one that I like to use for kind of just quite simple infographics. They're quite good for Twitter cards and things like that. They do have simple graph tools for you to put in. So they almost have like a little version of Excel that you can enter your information into, and then it will create quite a sleek, nice looking chart quite quickly. And you can also make bigger infographics, like the classic type with lots of information, and they have lots of out-of-the-box icons. You can add colour and imagery in there. And yeah, a lot more data visualization tools here for various things. So even if you're going for something like word clouds, which is kind of increases the size based on the frequency that a word is used. So it's quite a nice way to visualize like feedback that you get from people, for example, and qualitative data to understand what words are in there. Lots to explore, some that I've used, some that I haven't. So definitely ones to look into and have a play around with as well. Yeah, and again, some more tools on sort of visualization and accessibility. And this was the Financial Times fun take-home activity of sort of, it's a way of kind of making people think through how they read charts and how certain visual aspects can actually be quite misleading or confuse people. And it's an interesting one because it's quite interactive. It's actually collecting data at the same time as talking about data. It's quite meta. So it asks you to kind of guess how big, which is the biggest segment, like B, H, F or E, and then it says how you performed based on kind of everyone else who's interacted with it. So again, very meta. And the Office for National Statistics has been doing a bit of that as well, is actually trying to get people to engage with the data rather than just read it and consume it. But actually, I think they had a chart that was something like, see if you can continue where you think this trend will go after Brexit, for example. So it's a way of getting people to actively engage with it, but also it's sort of collecting data on people's perceptions, so that so it's quite interesting and quite fun. So that's the main bulk of my kind of talk. So my sort of summary take-home points would be to keep your why and your who's front and centre. So why are we doing this, and who's it for really? So the audience focus. Seek help. There's lots out there. I'm by all means still learning. So and what I know has come from much wiser heads than me. And yeah, so I think another thing is to be a consumer and try and look at data visualization, especially bad examples, as I say, and not in a way that's trying to, throw shade, but just because you will learn from them and think, oh, I would have done that, and they've done it, and apparently that's wrong. So and it's a really good way to learn, including your own. Yeah, and just have fun really. Experiment, review, stay curious. Yeah, and enjoy really. Thanks very much.